ex-military. I served for 21 years. 17 of those was as a dog handler. I thoroughly enjoyed my time in the ADF and left extremely happy. I'm now enjoying my time out of the army. I loved taking my dogs to the beach, or my dog to the beach. I just love getting out with the dog. And this is my interview with a Navy diver.
I was born in Mackay, Queensland, so Queenslander born and bred through and through. Spent most of my primary school years in and around the Mackay area before moving out towards Moranbah, so I spent the rest of my primary school years there. Prior to that though, my mum and dad had broken up, so my mum was down in Griffith, New South Wales. At around the time that I was going to high school, I decided I wanted to go and live with mum, so that's where I finished off all my high school years down there in Griffith. Loved to play a bit of football, rugby league when I was in primary school, but unfortunately all the other kids got a bit bigger than me, and I stayed a bit skinny and tall and string beanie, so I was on the wing for a while, but I was just getting knocked around a bit too much, so I gave that up after a while. For quite a long time I wanted some ink before I joined the army, and as a young fella, but being younger than 18 I just wasn't allowed. But the first one that I got was this one here, which is just the dog's head. I had a magazine called Live to Ride. It's a motorcycle magazine. They had some designs on their t-shirts, and this is one of the dog's heads from their t-shirts. Loving dogs for so long, this was what I wanted for my first tat. And a bit of a funny story behind that one actually. When we went and did our first initial training for IETs, at the start of the course they said no one is to go and get tattoos because like the healing process, it was going to affect our training. Wouldn't be able to go and train properly with the risk of infection and the like. So no tattoos were allowed during the training, but towards the end of the training they said training is now finished. We actually had to do our march out the next day or so, but as soon as we heard that, about 4 or 5 of us off went into the cross in King's Cross, got our tattoos. I got the dog's head. A couple of other guys got some funny ones, like a banana with legs and arms. That was a little bit funny. But we got back the next day, and the staff found out that we had some tattoos, and they said, "We told you no tattoos." And I sort of said, "Well, you said that the end of the course was yesterday, and we're all finished." So they actually let us off on that one, which was
off the hook.
Nice. Yeah, got off the hook for it. Next one. This is quite a large one. I'd liked tribal for a while after the dog tattoo. So this was the next one that I got. This was in 2009, which was actually very soon after I was in the contact where I was received all these scars from the RPGs and all the injuries. The tattooist was a little bit concerned about going over some of the scars, but they've gone in and around most of them, and for the bits that did go over the scars, they worked out all right.
And what were the scars from?
From 2008, when I was in the contact with when Sabi went missing with Mark Donaldson. They're from RPGs, shrapnel from the RPGs. So managed to cop a fair bit of shrapnel on the arms and legs and torso. But yeah, the tattoo actually wraps up and around and goes around down on the back there a bit as well.
Very cool.
Yeah. The other ones over here, this one here, this was after our second trip to Nepal. Kira and I like to get outdoors and do a little bit of hiking and walking and the like. So this was just to commemorate that. Actually, the first time we went to Nepal, within a week of us returning was when they had those massive earthquakes there. So we wanted to go back the second time just so we could not necessarily see the destruction, but to provide some aid just through us going back and being tourists again, because I understand that the tourist trade was quite well affected. So we just wanted to keep going back and keep giving. And then the other one here, this is actually just to commemorate mine and Kira's wedding. So it's basically just our wedding rings. Kira got one as well, so she's got this one down on her wrist. Kira also got this one, but she didn't like where it was, so she got it zapped off. So now I've got that one and she doesn't. My grandfather was in the military quite early on in his career, or his life. There was no real other family members that had gone into the military that I was aware of, but one day in high school, the army came around, or the Defence Force recruiting team came around, and that's where I learnt that the military was there. It was an option as a career, and that's where I also learnt that dogs were in the army. I'd always had that interest in the dogs and training dogs and just being around dogs. So not quite as soon as I finished the army, I had to deal with some acne issues there, and before I could actually be accepted in the army. But as soon as that was good to go, that's where I decided I wanted to be. I joined the army in '95. Unfortunately, at that time when you were joining the army, you didn't get to, or you didn't know what your core was going to be for your actual job and your allocation. So I turned up to, or when I went to recruiting, they said, yeah, you can be an engineer, you can be a dog handler, and just let them know when you get to Kapuka. But unfortunately, got to Kapuka and started my 13 weeks training. And when we got to about halfway or so, when we started doing our allocations, they had about 7 positions for engineers, and obviously I wrote down I want to be a dog handler in engineers. And unfortunately, when it came to the end of the course, they said, yeah, we need a couple of the smarter guys. I think they're just pumping me up a bit to go to air defence and become missile numbers. So unfortunately, that was my allocation. I wasn't able to get that changed. So after air defence, did the IAT training there, spent another couple of years there, and then finally got my core transfer in to become an engineer. Spent a couple of years as an engineer before I finally got my dog handler's course. And then from my 21 years in the army, my last 17 was all as a dog handler. So I thoroughly enjoyed my time in the army. The first days of service was some time ago now. It was 25 years ago. So I do actually remember getting on the bus in Sydney, driving all the way down to Kapuka or Wagga Wagga. And I do remember getting off the bus with all the other new guys there, and we all dressed nicely, all had our long hair and different outfits. But as soon as we were off that bus, or actually before we even got off the bus, it was straight into it, knife hands telling us what to do, straight off the bus in a line, and I'm pretty sure it might have been straight into haircuts then as well. Served in quite a few different deployments and different operations. There was actually quite a few within Australia as well. Things like the 2000 Olympic Games, 2006 Commonwealth Games, did as dog handler, so I was doing searches as well for the Queen's visit to Australia one time. I've actually got a really cool picture of myself and my current dog at the time, Vegas, meeting the Queen. Vegas is sitting there and the Queen's standing in front of me, and the dog's like reaching out and sniffing her handbag. So we joked that she was holding a desert eagle in there. I'm not too sure if that's true or not. Other things was Commonwealth Heads of Government meetings, and then Rugby World Cup, we assisted there with our searches as well. Bunch of other different operations and searches and training and all the like in Australia. But for all of my overseas deployments, most of them were as a dog handler. My first one though was to East Timor, which was as an APC driver for my engineer section. Following that, there was the Solomon Islands in 2003. East Timor was 99, 2000. And then after the Solomon Islands as a dog handler, I had 5 deployments to Afghanistan. 4 of those was with the Special Operations Task Group, all as a dog handler once again, searching for explosives and weapons. Following that, my second deployment was in 2008 with the Special Operations Task Group in support of the SAS, so in support of one of their SAS troops there with all their teams inside of there. There was a number, we were out almost, pretty much almost every other day on operations and patrols. Unfortunately, on the 2nd of September, when we were ambushed, we'd already been up in that Uruzgan area for a few days. We did a few operations there helping out the US Special Forces in the area, who were undermanned and unable at that point in time to actually get out and do their job. So they were more than happy to have us in the area and to go out and do some patrols with us. And we'd stirred up a bit of a hornet's nest apparently, and by the time we got to the 2nd of September, we'd gone out on a patrol, quite a successful patrol to start with, achieved quite a few of our objectives. It was unfortunately when we were returning, our path, our exfil path was blocked to go the way that we sort of had wanted to go, so we're coming back along the same route. And unfortunately they'd amassed about 200 Taliban in the area who conducted a bit of a rolling ambush as we were coming back through. They would hit us from both sides and they'd just keep rolling along. So unfortunately that the distance through that valley was a good 4 or 5 Ks. The contact lasted for about 8 or 9 hours. I was shot in the hip with a ricochet. Quite a few of the other boys had been shot, and we spoke a little bit earlier about some of the other scars on my arm and my body. That was mostly from a few RPGs that had exploded quite close, and got some shrapnel wounds there. Unfortunately, one of those severed the lead that had Sabi attached to my body armour, and she was able to get free. From that point in time though, getting hit by another RPG a little bit later, I wasn't actually getting blown off the vehicle. I wasn't able to recover Sarbi during that contact. It wasn't until 14 months later when the US were doing another operation in that area, or some patrols in that area, which she was found. I do actually remember a little bit after that as well, when I was blown off the car by an RPG. Dono actually came running past, and as he was helping up the interpreter, he said to me, "Come on, Simo, let's go." And that sort of jogged me back into action, but unfortunately not enough to be able to recover Sabi. When I was shot in the hip, I thought I'd actually taken position on the ground to return fire, but I was probably actually knocked to the ground. But when something like that happens, and when the RPGs were exploding and we were getting people being knocked over by them and receiving the shrapnel wounds, there isn't an awful lot of time for thought. A lot of it was just reaction, and I think a lot of that comes down to our training, like repetition training, processes and systems, just having that drilled into you and just doing those practices and those drills over and over and over again. I think that's where the need to actually have thoughts at that point in time, in those instances, isn't necessarily required. But if you do those drills and those practices over and over and over again, then it's going to stand you in very good stead for being able to react in such a way. Arriving in Afghanistan for the first time was quite exciting. Unfortunately, understanding that going into a war zone shouldn't be exciting, but there was that excitement there, and just being with my team, the guys that I'd trained with for so long, and then the same for each of the other 4 deployments after that as well. You train with guys for 4, 5, 6, 8 months before you deploy sometimes, and you form those relationships and those friendships and that comradeship that you do actually get a little bit excited to actually go and do your job, to actually be there for what you've been trained for. So, and I think some of that is what people miss when they do come home from deployments, and especially when they do discharge as well. Yeah, as a dog handler for the bulk of my time in the ADF, most of my role was to train the dogs, the explosive detection dogs, train the handlers, and then when I was on operations, to actually handle the dogs. So we were out, for most of the part for SOTG, we weren't doing route clearance per se. We were actually fortunate enough in some of the latter deployments to have helicopter support from the US, so we would fly into an area. So most of our role then would just be to search compounds to be able to persecute or prosecute the Taliban that we had captured, make sure that we're actually finding the weapons and the explosives and the caches on them, so that they could actually be taken through the proper process and taken out of the battlefield that way. Otherwise, our main role as well, if we were on a ground move, either on foot or on vehicle, was to actually search in front of the vehicle in front of the troops to make sure that the routes were searched for explosive devices so that no one else was injured behind us. My most memorable experiences over there, unfortunately, just due to the nature of my work and who I was with, I was actually involved with quite a lot of the notable happenings there, I guess you could say. Clearly, I spoke about the 2008 Battle of Uruzgan, where Mark Donaldson was awarded his VC and Sabi went missing. There was another one in Shawali Kot, known as the Shawali Kot Offensive. I was on the ground for 5 days there fighting with 2 Commando. That was also when RS was awarded his VC, Victoria Cross. The SAS troop that time had landed in support of us, and unfortunately they'd landed in amongst a group of Taliban who were actually preparing to come and attack us, so they sort of took the heat off of us for that one. I was actually in one of the helicopters when, in one of the 4 helicopters when there was a helicopter crash, and unfortunately we lost quite a few commandos in that helicopter crash. We actually had an engineer in every helicopter except for that one, so whilst feeling thankful that none of my engineer soldiers or guys that were in my team were injured, we did actually lose those commando guys, which was very unfortunate, along with the American pilot for the chopper as well. Quite a few other incidents as well, being, like I said, that role that I was in, being on the ground quite often. We were often in contact, and lots of them were still fairly high level, but just not as notable and not as reported on. The way I see pressure and stress may be slightly different to a lot of people. For me, stress isn't necessarily a thing to be scared of or something to be avoided. when you are stressed to a certain degree, it is going to help you actually perform better and to perform to a higher level. If you're doing something and you're not stressed, then you're just going to work at a certain level. If there is some form of stress there, then you're going to have to improve yourself and increase your ability to be able to work at that higher level. So the way I see stress is that it actually enables me to work at a higher level.
Was that something that you came across in your deployment, coming across children that you were trying to verify whether they were a bomber or whether they were just a normal civilian? Or
yeah, it was always a hard thing to comprehend and fathom that they would use children in those roles. We were aware of it, we did know it was happening. I didn't experience it specifically myself, but there were a few instances where children were used as either to the furthest degree as actual suicide bombers, but they would also use the children as like spies or someone that could report back on us and what we were doing with their radios and equipment that way. But we're always aware of it, still always wary of children as well as the adults.
I know we talked about a couple near-death experiences. Were there any others, and what were the main factors that kept you alive?
Yeah, there was quite a few. I do remember one where we'd been on patrol, and I can't quite remember exactly where it was, but we'd formed up an area, a position where we were taking a bit of a break. We were just having a bit of a chat with the locals, and I remember I was sitting in one position, and for whatever reason I just sat up and moved a little bit just to get either more comfortable, get a better view, and as soon as I'd moved, a hail of bullets actually came through and tore through the spot that I'd just been laying on the ground, and we just went into that contact. So a little bit of luck there to miss out on that one. There was another incident that I do remember. I was working with the commandos on a mission, and we're actually on our way back from that mission. I was at the back end of one of the platoons. They'd all passed through a gully area. We did have our ECM, electronic countermeasures, turned on, so everyone went through the area without incidents. I passed through an area as well. I wasn't searching at the time. We were just moving on foot. And then unfortunately, some of our Afghani support interpreters and soldiers that didn't have ICM were about 40 meters or so behind me. And because they weren't inside the ECM bubble, as they went through an area that this whole platoon and myself had just passed through, a device was set off there, and unfortunately they were killed. But another incidents where if I didn't have that ECM, could have potentially been killed there as well.
Wow.
I'm not really a good luck, or I did mention good luck just before, but I don't have any traditions or things that I did. I don't have a pair of smelly socks that I only ever wear out on patrol. They'd get pretty manky pretty soon after the heat and the sweating over there. But I think for me, whenever I did go out on patrol, I had everything laid out perfectly in my space and where my body armor and weapons and everything was, so that I'd be able to grab all of my gear within an instance, and I'd know where everything was on my body armor and in my pockets and in my pouches. And I'd conducted all the drills and over again, so that I gave myself the best opportunity to do my job to my best ability without relying on luck. Yeah, I think Australians being Australians, we deal with a lot of things with humour, and it was definitely no difference to that when we were deployed overseas. I do remember one instance where one of the guys was feeling a little bit overweight, so he let a few people know that his intention was to cut back on the chockies and everything so that he could drop a bit of weight. We might have actually been towards the end of the deployment where everyone sort of gets a little bit fitter before they go home, but unfortunately, the guys, the jokesters that got wind of that, every time they came back from the mess, they'd grab a couple of chockies, and as they were walking past his room, they'd just drop them on his bed. And unfortunately, he would eat them, so I'm not sure how we went with his goals of losing any weight. I do actually remember another time as well, in our accommodation, the doors were facing each other across the hallway. I remember a couple of the boys tying a couple of doors to each other, so there was essentially two groups of guys trapped in their rooms, and it was quite funny to see them trying to come out of the vents in the bottom of the doors because no one else was letting them out. And Australians, being who we are, we deal with a lot of things through humour. And I guess having those close-knit sections that we had in our teams, really helped. We had that comradeship. We were able to talk to each other about the things that were happening, and you had that support there while you were there. I think that's part of the problem why when some of the guys do come home and they either discharge or they're no longer with those guys that they deployed with, that they don't have those people that they can talk to anymore. And especially with the guys that are discharged, and if they lose contact with those friends that had those same experiences as them, I think that's when some of the issues can start coming about. After 21 years, I had quite a bit of long service leave racked up, as well as a whole bunch of regular leave as well. After 5 deployments in the last 9 years that I was in the Army, I had almost a year's worth of leave. So I actually took all of my leave as paid days. So I actually finished working and going into the office about a year before my discharge date. But I think I had about a week or so that I sort of had to myself, and to get back, or not get back, but to just get my headspace into what I was going to do next. And I already had a job lined up, which was in the property investment space. So for the last 10 years in the Army, I've been investing in properties, and that's one of my other key interests. So yeah, I went straight into that after about a week or so, and it really didn't feel like a massive change for me. I think part of that was that I did go into a company that had a whole bunch of ex-military as well, working in that company. So that was very helpful. I've made quite a few, or a few close friends, some from the very early parts of my career, military career, and some from later on, but I'm probably the worst person in the world for maintaining contact and picking up the phone and talking to these guys. But with the event of social media now, and just being able to send messages, I think that has helped a lot to maintain contact. So I don't necessarily pick up the phone and have a conversation, but you see other guys on like Instagram or Facebook, you see them post something, so you leave a snarky comment or a bit of a joke, and I think that sort of carries over and continues our relationships that we had while we were in the Defence Force or in the Army ourselves. I think that's actually been quite helpful to keep me grounded, I think, and keep me in the same headspace. What do you call it, like the breezeways or your common areas, depending on where you worked or how you work, there's always jokes, there's always a bit of office banter or a bit of banter there, and you give each other a bit of grief, and that's actually what I see now in the job that I'm actually in now, with a different one to the one where I first started when I discharged. We've grown and advanced, and we're in a really good space. We've got a really good team of ex-ADF members there, and we've got some really good office banter there as well.
Great, good stuff.
Yeah, I've got about seven medals now, I think it is, through the normal service medal, the long service medal, and then all of the awards and medals that come with from being deployed to East Timor with the Interfet, Solomon Islands with the defence medals there, and then Afghanistan with the ISAF medals and all the other deployment medals from those ones as well. Yeah, I was always, when Sabi went missing, I was in hospital for about 9 or 10 days or so, getting all the shrapnel and everything removed from my arms and body and legs. And while I was there, I was still in contact with the US Special Forces back up at Anaconda in Uruzgan, and they were getting reports that the dog had been seen and that she was still in the area. So I actually, as soon as I got out of hospital, I actually flew back up there in a Chinook and spent another 2 weeks there. Actually, I wasn't actually allowed or able to go outside of the base, but I did spend a lot of time doing the perimeter and looking out with binoculars, trying to see the dog and trying to see if she was going to be able to be returned, and just in case someone did try and return her while I was still there. But unfortunately, no good that she wasn't returned that time. I stayed in country for another month and a half or so, doing different roles with the PUC, or the persons under control, sort of biometrics and enrollments and everything like that when they were bringing people back in through base. So I stayed there and did that for a while. But I went home, and 13, 14 months later, we actually got notice that she'd been found. The US Special Forces in the area still were aware that she was there, and they were still getting intermittent reports that she was either dead or had been killed, or that she'd been seen in this compound or that compound. Typically, the Taliban commanders' wives' compounds was where she was being moved around for that time. So they were able to keep track through that, but they didn't know exactly where it was, and it was just an unassociated patrol that they were doing when they actually came across the dog and were able to find her, recognised her just through knowing that she was missing, given her some words command in English, which she responded to. So they put two and two together and grabbed the dog, made contact with the Australians back at TK or Taran Kaut, sent her back there, and I was in Sydney at the time on course and received a phone call from one of the other dog handlers there saying Sabi had been found, and I was over the moon. And it wasn't too soon after that I was actually deploying to Afghanistan again. So I deployed with another dog that had been trained and that I'd been teamed up with. And I actually got to see Sabi in TK again before she was actually sent home. So she spent a few months back in Taran Kaut before she had to go to the UAE for 6 months of quarantine, spent her quarantine there, and my deployment at that time had finished, so I got to see her in the UAE. On the way back home, a few more months later, she actually made it back to Australia for another month of quarantine before she was actually released. And I actually tried to have her as a work dog again, but the CDF wouldn't have a bar of it and said, no, she's retiring. He wouldn't put his name to sending her back out to work again. So Sabi actually got to come and live with myself and Kira, with my wife. And she spent a few years there as my much-loved pet and backyard dog. It was great.
What an incredible story.
I think in terms of overcoming trauma, everybody is different. And I don't fully understand PTSD and how it affects different people in certain ways, but I can understand that everybody is different. It is going to affect different people differently. And I do understand, you don't have to go into battle or into war to be affected by PTSD. It can be from any life experience, really. For us though, and for myself, just knowing that what I've experienced doesn't define me. I learn from it and I grow from it, but I don't let it define me and I don't let it hold me back. So I think just knowing that I do have no disillusions as well, that at some point in the future I may have issues with PTSD from what I've experienced, what I've gone through. And if I do recognise those signs or symptoms, then I'll be the first one to reach out and get some help.
Great.
Some of what I would consider some of the strongest people and the strongest personalities from quite a few friends that I know personally have actually succumbed to taking their own lives from PTSD. And these are people that you never thought would actually take that option and take that route, go down that route. But unfortunately, it does affect them. And all I can say is that if you are friends with these people, or even if you are that person yourself, know that there is people out there that can help you. And like I said, I'm more than willing to put my hand up and say that I'm struggling or that I need help if I do recognise those signs and symptoms myself. There is no weakness in getting help. Highly encourage that you keep those phone numbers handy just in case there is a time and place that you need it. Get that help, and just surround yourself with people that understand as well, just so you've got someone else you can talk to. I joined as a 19-year-old, and for 21 years. So I discharged, going by that, I was about 41 or 42 when I discharged. So most of my time was in the ADF. So I think that I, as a person and who I am now, have very strongly been shaped by my military career. I am very systems and process oriented. So everything that I do has a process and a system behind it. I'm doing things for a reason. I don't tend to leave things to chance, and I don't just sort of go, it'll be right, something will work out. I'll actually work out a system or a process or have something in place to make sure that whatever I'm doing is going to basically reach the desired end result that I want. Experiences and adventures. At the moment, I'm heavily focused on my work with the real estate and property investment side of things. Also doing that side hustle there of Dave's Dogs, creating training courses, just so I can pass on that 17 years of experience of dog handling and dog training, just so other people can benefit from that, and all that experience just isn't lost. But the knees and the back and the neck aren't quite what they were anymore, so I don't know how many more treks up and down mountains I'll be doing, but Kira and I do still like to get out and about, and we'll take Charlie, our current dog, out as much as we can, and we are quite outdoorsy and try to get out. But I think some of the mountain climbing sort of things and might be on the back burner for a while. The Everest Base Camp trek, unfortunately you can't train for altitude or altitude sickness. You can train your cardio, you can train your legs for endurance and for going up and down all the steps, but unfortunately Australians being where we live, I think the average height in Australia is about 40 to 60 metres, so we don't get many opportunities to experience altitude. So unfortunately when we were heading up to the base camp of Everest, probably about 2 or 3 days from, or actually 3 or 4 days from the base camp, we started feeling the effects of altitude and a bit of altitude sickness. But we just took it slowly, we pushed on, but the headaches and the nausea were just getting too much. So we actually stopped about a day below actual base camp, but we were still happy with what we'd achieved. And it's a beautiful place, and we're actually very happy that we did actually push on that little bit. But there's no point risking it once you're starting to feel those effects. So we turned around and yeah, made our way back down and still enjoyed our time there.
Good memories.
Advice for Navy Diver fans would be, don't let the past define you. Take what has happened to you and to your family and your friends and around you. Learn from it, learn from your experiences. Just take that and put any systems and processes that you need in place so that if something happens, you know how to deal with it. I basically systemized my whole life, so that's my advice. Just put things in place so you know what you're going to do if something happens, and just keep going forwards, keep your head high and keep going.
And take the piss out of each other.
And give each other grief all the time.
Thanks for your service, David, and thank you so much for sharing your story with the Navy Diver. We hope it may challenge or inspire our fellow veteran mates and the broader public as well.
Not a problem, it's been my pleasure.